Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to, it's Thursday already. How did that happen? This term it's rocketing by, right? This term is rocketing by really quickly. That's a little terrifying, but that's okay, because this is week 3, right? Oh my God, how does this happen? How does this happen? Like, it's going to be week 3, and then the next time we talk about this, it's going to be like week 11 or something, and we're going to be almost done. Ugh, okay. That's kind of the only thing. I really like teaching here, and I like teaching, period. But one of the things I kind of don't like is that the courses are so short. Because it feels like we don't really have time to do anything, and before, like just when we've gotten started, like we're almost done. And so, no, well, we kind of do it this way. The high school does it this way because most of our students are university transfer students. And so we kind of work more on the university calendar. And so we've kind of adapted our secondary program to have a 3-term thing rather than 2 like regular high schools have. So we've kind of done that to align with what we were already doing in UT. At least I think that's why we did it. I think students like it because it allows them to finish things quicker, which sometimes is what they want to do when they come here, but also I feel like it's, as soon as we get started and get comfortable, we're like almost done. So that's unfortunate, but what are you thinking there, Mulder? You look like you're having a thought. There's no thoughts? No? Blank? Empty? You're an empty cup waiting to be filled? I could, but I don't think I'd be right. Okay, anyway, let's get going here. So who is here? Ryan is here. Good morning to you, Ryan. Or good evening to you, I guess. Shania is here. Hello, Shania. Tomorrow's a big day, I think, right, Shania? Oof, exciting. Nicole is here. Good morning, Nicole. Simrat is here. Good morning to you. And Abby's here. Good morning, Abby. And Nasra's online this morning. Good morning, Nasra. Okay, so yesterday we started talking about oppression and power, right? And these are important concepts because they will inform what we're doing in the rest of the course, right? So we kind of have to know the vocabulary and how these things work in order to talk about sexism and racism and things like that. So we need some common definitions and common understandings. And so yesterday, of course, I started off talking about going back to Mean Girls here and the social groups we knew from North Shore High School here. And I mentioned, of course, that sometimes society likes to organize things in binary oppositions. So they like to sort of take 2 extremes and say, okay, things are either this or that, right? They're one or the other. They're up or down, good or bad, hot or cold, yes or no, black or white, smart or dumb, whatever, right? We like to just, try to put things into very easy categories that are in opposition to each other. And that'll come up later. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But of course, I think we all pretty intuitively recognize that that doesn't really work probably most of the time, right? Some things are, hot and some things are cold, and then some things are kind of somewhere in the middle, right? There's somewhere in the gray area. Again, that'll come up a little bit later. And also the idea that we, when we belong to a social group, we often define ourselves by what that group is, but also what they are not, right? Or what the group is not. So I said here in Canada, we define ourselves as Canadians, and we have an idea of what that means. Maybe you have an idea of what that means too. But we also define ourselves by the fact that we're not Americans, right? We're not those guys, because we know what those guys are like. That's not us. We're not us, right? We're different. We're Canadians, right? So, and we often do that, right? We define ourselves by what we are, but also by what we're not, right? So the plastics, we said, probably would define themselves as good morning. Good morning. The plastics would probably define themselves as pretty and fashionable and the most popular girls in school. But how would they define themselves as what they're not. What would the plastics say that they are not? Fat. Nerds. Ugly. What's that? They're not, right? Okay. They're
not mad, like stupid, brain.
Oh yeah, they're not dummies, right? They're not dumb. One of them is. One of them is. But they don't. But it's interesting. They don't. The other girls are kind of. They don't make fun of her for that, right? Because Karen is pretty dumb, right? But they don't tease her about that. They're really actually quite nice to her. But yeah, they would probably say that they're not. Regina George certainly is not, right? She's an intelligent person. So again, we define ourselves by what we are and by what we're not. And so I said that the social groups at the school in some ways could be understood in this way, right? Because they're kind of in some ways based on stereotypes and in some ways based on race and ethnicity and gender. And kind of where we got to yesterday was the definition of oppression itself. And so oppression, we said here, was a set of policies and practices and traditions and norms and definitions and discourses and things that people say and things that people don't say or aren't allowed to say, that all kind of work together to benefit one group in society and disadvantage another one, right? And so the groups that we're talking about here, we're going to call dominant groups and minoritized groups. And so I showed you this little chart yesterday, kind of detailing some of the oppressions that we know. And so I said that oppression is kind of an unequal relationship, right? An unequal relationship between the dominant group, who has power and resources and opportunities, and the minoritized group, who tends to have less, right? Either a little bit less or a lot less, depends, but this is kind of a relationship between two groups. And so I have this little chart for you here, and you've probably noticed already, or I think we mentioned yesterday, that this is a chart that's more made for kind of North America, right? If you go to China, for instance, if I go to China, who's the dominant group in China in terms of race or ethnicity? If I go to China, it's Chinese people, right? They're the dominant group in China. And so this kind of chart works for North America, but doesn't necessarily work for other countries, right? So every country is going to have a slightly different sort of pattern of relationships between social groups, depending on where you are and depending on who's in power, right? Of course, here in North America, it's Christians, right? Christians are a dominant group in North America. But if I go to Saudi Arabia, not so much, right? Muslims are the dominant group in Saudi Arabia. So it depends on where you go, right? So this chart is kind of tailor-made for North America. Other places it would look different. One of the things that we'll kind of find out today, or that we'll talk about today, is that oppression is different than prejudice or discrimination. And sometimes we hear these words kind of thrown around in society and they get mixed up, and sometimes we think they mean similar things or the same thing. And in fact, they're kind of not, okay? So when we talk about oppression, we talk about a society-wide, good morning, we talk about a society-wide pattern, okay? So oppression isn't about one person doing something or saying something to another. What it is when one social group, when their ideas and prejudices and stereotypes and ways of doing things, when they are backed up by power, right? When they're able to make society in such a way that it benefits them and it disadvantages the other groups, okay? So again, oppression is kind of society-wide. It doesn't really happen between individual people, although individual people's interactions are going to be affected by an oppression that exists in society. Does that make some sort of sense? Yeah, so oppression is a big thing, right? Oppression is a society-wide pattern. It's not necessarily the behavior of, one person or a few people, but it does affect the behavior of those people. So, right. So to kind of understand this, I have a little article for you to read, and I think it does a reasonably good job of explaining what stereotype and what prejudice and discrimination are. And it's not a perfect article. It's not perfectly well written, unfortunately. There's a little bit of extra information that I don't think if I was writing it I would have added, but that's okay. We can make our way through it. It'll be fine. And the other reason I do like this article is that it refers to a few different psychological studies which are really interesting and will, I hope, kind of enlighten us and give us some information about what we're talking about. So again, it's not a perfect article, but I really like what's in it, so we're gonna go with it, okay? So the article is called Psychological Theories of Prejudice and Discrimination. And so, as usual, I have it in Microsoft Teams for you to read. And then there's a few questions, which I think are in a separate file, but I'll put them up here on the screen for you if it makes it easier as well. And so I'll be asking you, of course, what is a stereotype? How can we define it? And what are the different types of stereotypes? And I think there's two that the article mentions. What prejudice is. It'll talk about this experiment in Jane Elliott's class, which is very interesting. I'll ask you, why do stereotypes tend to remain stable over time? Because they definitely do. They'll talk about 4 functions of prejudice. I'll explain that a little bit later, but that's what I'll ask you. There's Tajfel's social identity theory that I'd like to know just a little bit about, and some potential solutions to reduce prejudice that the article suggests. So what I'll let you do is I'll give you some time to read that article. I was going to say it's not long, but I actually don't remember how long it is. Let me see. Five and a half pages? It's not long. I'll give you the time needed to read that. But let's dive into this article and see what we learn, because there's a lot of interesting things here to learn about and to discuss, okay? So maybe I'll just put some time up on the clock here and we'll see how we go. Okay, good people. Let's talk about this. So, like I mentioned, there's a lot in here, and again, some of it is not that useful, and if it was up to me, I would exit out. But that's okay. We're going to pull out the stuff that's important and talk about it and take what we need from it, because there is some good stuff in here. My first question, of course, for you is, what is a stereotype? And try to phrase it to me in your own words rather than exactly what they said.
Stereotypes are those things everyone believes those, like boys' colors blue and girls' colors pink.
Yeah, so stereotypes are often kind of socially or culturally held, right? Often they're not individual stereotypes, often they're ones that everyone seems to, if not believe, at least know about, right? Yeah, so there's that piece of it, right? They're often very widely known in society. What else?
For me, that the stereotype is anything that can be used to identify either an individual or a group of individuals.
Right. So there's an identity piece to this, right? It's something about being able to understand the identity of groups of people, particular groups of people, or to know something about the identity of individuals, right? So that's good. That's another piece. Ryan here says, stereotype is when society categorizes groups. Yeah, so that's kind of the group stereotype, right? We put people in a group together and we say, this is what this group of people is like, right? They're like this, or they do this, or they never do this, or they like this, or they don't like this, or whatever, right? We describe groups of people. We characterize them based on a group. What else is stereotype? This is all good so far.
Feelings and thoughts that you have about a particular group based on their physical appearance or some characteristic.
Yeah, so, and I think that's important too, because often, stereotypes are often based on the eyes, right? Because humans are very visual creatures, right? We're not like dogs. We don't find out about the world through our nose, right? We don't go around sniffing other people. At least I hope you don't. You shouldn't. Don't go around sniffing people. But we take in information about the world through our eyes, right? We learn about other people, at least at first. We learn about them with our eyes, right? We watch them. And so, yeah, stereotypes are very much based on things that we can see, right? So what people look like, what they wear, how they behave. Maybe we use our ears too in terms of how they speak. And we use those things to form kind of an image of what we think they're like. And I think that's kind of the like if you reduced stereotypes down to like the bare minimum, like in math where you go to the lowest common denominator. You've done that, right? Yeah. If you go down to the lowest common denominator with stereotype, I think that's what it is that I look at you, I see something, I get some visual information in my eyes, and that allows me to know something about you. Now, of course, whether I know that and whether it's true is a different story, but I think that's how stereotypes work. I see you, and that allows me to, what I see allows me to tell something about who you are, right? And again, I think that's kind of the base, the lowest common denominator. But again, all those other things are important as well, right? The idea that, we often attribute characteristics to groups of people. The idea that often we share the same stereotypes within a society, right? We have kind of the same beliefs. Yeah, and that's kind of what the article says and what Sarah has here, right? Is that a stereotype is an attitude toward a person or group on the basis of some physical characteristic or physical fact, right? So again, we take in visual information and we take what we know and we come to, we think we have an idea about what people are like or who people are. Now there were two types of stereotypes, and Sarah's actually got them here: individual and group stereotypes. And how do those two things operate? How does an individual stereotype work?
Individual stereotypes are based on personal characteristics, like their names and maybe their behavior.
Yeah. So can you think of an example of that? Like if you saw, someone on the street who dressed a certain way or acted a certain way, that you would kind of think you knew about them based on a stereotype? Give me an example if you can. What's that? A Karen. What's a Karen?
The manager, someone would always complain.
Right. So yeah, and this is new, right? This is kind of a brand new stereotype, right? The stereotype of the Karen, right? Which is kind of unfortunate for people named Karen, right? I'm sure there's lots of very nice Karens out there, but unfortunately they've been labeled. And so what's the stereotype of a Karen? Someone who complains a lot?
Someone who wants to get their way. How do I say this? Someone who wants to be
I know what you're looking for, but
wants to be part. I don't know.
Can somebody help Nicholas out if you know where he's trying to go?
Someone who complains, but like they don't have evidence.
Someone who complains but without kind of proper evidence, right? What else?
Someone who wants their wants and needs to be prioritized.
Yeah, someone who wants their wants and needs should be prioritized. They should be the priority. And I think the word I was thinking of when you were struggling there a minute ago was entitlement. Yeah, they feel entitled, right? I'm here and I want this thing, so where's my thing? I demand it, right? There's this sort of entitlement that goes along with this stereotype of Karens, right? And in some cases, there's a bit of a racial thing or a racist thing mixed in there as well, right? Because some Karens have been accused of, calling the police when, a black man has walked by them or walked their dog near them, or they've had very strong reactions. So sometimes there's a bit of a racist element mixed in there, but not always. But yeah, that's a stereotype, right? And so if we saw someone, complaining, maybe we might say, oh, she's totally a Karen, right? So we might think we know something about her by what she's doing, even though she might have a very valid complaint, right? Anything else? Like ways that you would think you would know something about someone based on how they behave or what they're wearing, or
Body type?
body type?
I don't know. That's what I think.
Yeah. Give me a little more there.
Oh. So, well, I mean, like, one will know if an individual is either like a little bit on the overweight side,
Sure.
muscular, or slim, I believe.
Right. So that's actually a good one, because and the article mentions it too, is that we often attribute beneficial characteristics to people who are more attractive, right? So if we see someone who's, walking down the street and they're in really good shape, right? They're either, a really kind of muscular in shape guy or a very kind of in shape woman, what might we think about them? what kind of personal characteristics might we imagine that they have?
Everything good.
Yeah, we might imagine everything good, right? And so particularly if we're attracted to them, or if they're, of a gender that we are attracted to, we might say, oh, I bet she's just so lovely and fantastic, and she might be a horrible person, but we're very likely to attribute these beneficial characteristics to pretty people, right? And people who are not so pretty, we might say, oh, this person looks grumpy, or this person looks, I bet they're a real jerk, or whatever. And it doesn't really work that way, right? You can't tell what people are like just by looking at them, although we do, right? And people who are, super in shape, or people who are a little bit overweight, sometimes we attribute other characteristics to them too. Like if someone was a little overweight, what might we think of them?
Americans.
That what? They're what?
Americans.
That they're Americans. Okay. Well, the data would bear you out there, Mulder, because they're a significant proportion of Americans are clinically overweight. But okay, we might think that. What else might we think of them?
Lazy.
Yeah, that they're lazy, or what else? Maybe they're lazy. Maybe they don't care about their health. Maybe they don't. Maybe they have no discipline, right? They have no self-control. They don't know when to stop eating. They just keep putting food in their mouth, right? We might have a lot of negative kind of ideas about them just for being a little bit overweight. And again, there's a number of reasons why people carry a little extra body fat, but which we don't have to go into here. But still, that's a good example of an individual stereotype, right? We see a characteristic about someone and we're like, oh, now I know what this person's about. And of course, often it's not true, right? What about group stereotypes? How do those work?
I think the stereotypes related to culture. Maybe.
Often they are, yeah. Yeah, so a group stereotype has to do with an idea you have about a group, and so when you see someone,
Yes,
you think you know something about them, right? And so if you know something about Canadians, let's say, and you find out that I'm Canadian, you might think that you know something about me because of that. And you might be right, you might be wrong. Abby's kind of, Asians are good at math, right? So here's a perfect kind of group stereotype, right? There's a group of Asian people, even though we have a lot of different nationalities and ethnicities kind of thrown into this Asian category, but regardless, Asian people are good at math. Therefore, if I see someone Asian, well, they must be good at math, right? That's kind of a group stereotype. That's a good one, Abby. Okay, so then what is prejudice?
It's basically a discriminating act towards a group of people.
Not yet. So that's actually discrimination, but we'll get to that in just 1 minute. That's kind of the next step. So you're just a smidge ahead of where we need to be. It's an extreme stereotype, but don't say that on a quiz. It doesn't say anything. But I know they say it they put it in bold in the. Anyway, but how is a prejudice different from a stereotype? This is the trick. Well, it's not that tricky, but this is the important part. How's prejudice different from stereotype?
Prejudice is something that is like a group of people have something that you do not like, and then you use those disagreements to like hate on the group.
Yeah, exactly. So prejudicial ideas have an emotion attached to them, like an emotional judgment, right? So they kind of lay it out here in the article, and they say there's a cognitive function, and then there's an affective function, and then there's a behavioral function. So there's a thinking part, a feeling part, and then a doing part, right? So the thinking part is the stereotype, the feeling part is the prejudice, and then what you do, the behavioral part, That's discrimination, right? So a stereotype might be, oh, Canadians say A all the time, right? A, how do you doing, eh? Weather's pretty good today, eh? Eh? It's a nice shirt, eh? Yeah, that's a very stereotypical Canadian thing. And of course, we don't all do that. But that's not really a prejudice, right? Like there's no kind of emotional feel. Like we might chuckle at it, ha ha, but there's no real kind of emotional judgment to that, right?
I think for stereotypes, we understand those things like unwanted, but for prejudice, we know that we know those things, you know.
What you prejudice, you know that you know those things? Okay. I know you're struggling a little bit to explain, but see if you can. Okay. I'll tell you what. I can clarify this in a little more detail, but let's take a break because we've been working hard for about an hour here. Take a break, come back. We'll talk about these three things, stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination, and then I will give you an example that will hopefully clarify things for you. Fingers crossed. Okay? Oops. All right. Okay, and we're back, people. Welcome back. Stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. So I'll come back to these questions in a second, but I want to try and separate these concepts out, okay? So this is what the article told us. The article told us that stereotypes were reduced or simplified characteristics of a group. Sometimes they are group stereotypes that we then attribute to individuals. Sometimes we have stereotypes about individuals that we attribute to a group. No. Sometimes we have stereotypes that we apply directly to individuals, okay? And again, there's usually no positive or negative judgments attached to these, okay? And so, again, you know, Canadians say A all the time. He, it's a little funny, but it's, yeah, we were drinking maple syrup and watching hockey, but there's nothing, you know, really, nobody has a really good or bad feeling about that. It's just is what it is, right? But prejudices have judgments. They have emotional feelings attached to them. And those feelings could be positive or negative. So you can be positively prejudiced towards something, although usually we use prejudice with kind of a negative context, right? Prejudice is usually thought of as bad, but it can be, you can have a positive prejudice as well. But again, they're unfair, right? Because they take these simplified characteristics and influence your thoughts and behavior toward people in a way that's kind of not fair, right? Because nobody is a stereotype, right? I'm Canadian, but I'm not, you know, I'm not a stereotype. I'm a person, right? Discrimination, like Scotty pointed out earlier, he said that this is kind of when we act on our prejudices, right? When we act on our learned prejudgments of others. And again, we can do this positively or negatively as well. We can positively discriminate or negatively discriminate. So, let me give you an example. Okay. Here we go. Here we have a dog, right? What are some stereotypes about dogs? What do we know about dogs? Not about this dog. We've never met this dog before. But what do we know about dogs? They're man's best friend. What else? They bark. They're what? They're good boys and girls. What else?
So I have a question.
Yes.
They're only good when they're trained, but if they're not, they're not.
Right. So dogs should be trained, right? Because otherwise they're wild and dangerous, right? What else? True. What else do we know? They're what? They're better than cats. How dare you? They're what? They're loyal. What else? What else do we know about dogs? Man's best friend, they're loyal. They're good when they're trained. When they're not so much.
They're so playful.
They're playful. Sure, they have, sometimes they have like an instinct to defend their owners or their household, so they can protect you sometimes if they're not a little dog in a purse, right? What else? Oh, they like to retrieve things. They like to bring it back, right? You throw a stick and they go after it and they hopefully bring it back to you. Sometimes not. What else do we know about dogs? They what? Yeah, they've got a really good sense of smell. Sarah says here they're loyal, right? Loyal. We said that too. That dogs have kind of a reputation for being loyal or being attached to their owners. What else do we know about dogs?
Smart.
Yeah, they're smart.
They are protective to their owners.
They're protective to their owners. Yes. What else?
They're so useful for police.
Yep, they're useful for the police, right? Probably because of their smartness and their, protective instincts, I guess. What else? Anything else? They have relationships with people? Yeah, Yeah. And they tend to do that, right? They tend to bond with people and interact with them and create relationships, right? They're social animals. Dogs are, right? Just like we are. Yeah. So that's good. Those are all good stereotypical ideas about dogs. And when we see a dog like this, we might actually think some of those things, right? We might look at that dog and imagine some or many of those stereotypes to be to be true. We might imagine them to be true. And so how does prejudice work? Well, prejudice often has to do, at least with dogs in my opinion, with our previous experience with them. So clearly I think Abby is a dog fan here, but who in this room likes dogs? Okay, almost everybody? Adel, dogs? Yes, no? Yes. Scotty? Dogs? Good? Bad? Bad. Okay. So most of us in this room seem to be positively prejudiced towards dogs, right? And so we look at this dog and we're like, yeah, he looks like a good boy, doesn't he? Abby thinks he looks like a good boy. And we call up all of these kind of stereotypical ideas, right? Dogs are loyal, they're playful, they're sweet, they form relationships with their owners, right? They like to play and have their tummies rubbed and play tug of war with them, right? They're fun animals, right? And again, those are positive prejudicial ideas, feelings that you have when you look at this dog. Do you know anything about this dog? No, right? Some of you might know that he's a German Shepherd. That's the breed he is, or she. I actually don't know that. This is just an internet dog. I don't know. This is not a dog that I know. So we don't really know anything about this dog, but we have these positive prejudicial feelings towards them based on our past experience and based on the stereotypes that we hold, right? But Scotty, you said you're not a dog fan. Why not?
Well, I have like a lot of bad experiences with dogs. Because every time
What happened? Yeah.
every time I walk through a certain area, I would always hear a dog like getting extremely agitated.
Yeah.
Whenever I walk past that certain area, a dog inside a house will become agitated and would try to chase me to death.
Yeah. So I think even though a lot of us in this room have positive associations and thoughts about dogs, I think we can also admit that dogs can be scary, right? Maybe not the little ones in the purse, but a dog like this could certainly be scary, right? I think he looks like a he to me, so I'm going to call him a he. But yeah, he looks like a big dog, right? He's probably very strong and powerful and fast. He's got big teeth. And could this dog be intimidating if he wanted to? He sure could, right? And so it's not too difficult for us to imagine, yeah, this could be a very scary dog too. And he looks pretty relaxed and happy at the moment, just sitting in the grass, chilling out. But we could also imagine him to be very agitated, right? And to be barking and growling and showing his teeth, right? And this would be a pretty scary dog if the dog was unhappy or feeling threatened, right? So again, it's very easy for us to sort of imagine those ideas about dogs too, right? If dogs aren't trained, yeah, they can be a problem, right? They can be frightening.
So what if dogs also they have that sense of smelling fear? Someone is scared of them, they will scare the person more.
They are, yeah, they're very, I'm not sure if they can smell fear, but they are very good, they are very good at reading our body language and our facial expressions. And I kind of think what it is more is that if you don't know how you feel about them, they don't know how you feel either, and so they're unsure, right? And so, if you're threatening them, then they know. And if you're like happy to see them, they know. But if you're like, I don't know what to do. If you feel nervous, suddenly they feel nervous because they don't know what you're going to do. But I don't know if maybe they can smell fear. I'm not sure. But anyway, Yeah, so if you had had a bad experience with a dog, or if you had been surrounded by people who didn't like dogs or had had bad experiences with dogs, then you would have absorbed a bunch of negative stereotypes about dogs, because those exist as well. And we didn't really come up with so many negative ones, but I think that's probably because of our positive prejudice towards them, right? So we all like dogs in here, and so when we saw this good boy, we're like, oh, he's probably loyal and fun, and he likes to play, and he likes to get his ears scratched, right? We can imagine those things about him much easier because of our prejudicial ideas. But if we have a negative prejudice toward him, toward dogs, we're going to look at this dog and say, woof, that's an intimidating looking dog, right? Could that be a scary dog, Scotty? That could be a scary dog, right? Not right now, but he could be, right? Again, he's a big intimidating looking animal, right? And if he was unhappy with you, it would make me nervous, right? I would be nervous about that dog threatening me. And so that's the difference between prejudice and discrimination, right? We have all of these ideas about what dogs are like, right? We don't know if any of those apply to this dog. We have no idea who this dog is. We have a bunch of ideas, and we have feelings that are attached to those ideas. Some of them are positive. We have positive prejudices towards dogs. Sometimes we have negative prejudices towards dogs. Would you say there's a negative prejudice towards cats? I think there is. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't like cats, even though they don't really know any cats or own any cats, but they don't really like them very much, right? And again, they're different kinds of animals, right? But there's a lot of negative prejudice towards cats. But anyway, I'm not going to go there. What I want to say is that, yeah, we've got stereotype, we've got prejudice, now we've got discrimination, right? So I might discriminate against this dog, right? So say this dog is my friend's dog, okay? And my friend calls me and says, hey, can I come over on the weekend and we'll, hang out and have a beer or something like that? And I might say, yeah, but only if you bring your dog, right? So I would be positively discriminating towards the dog, right? I'm saying, only come over if you bring that dog. I want to see the dog, right? So I'm positively discriminating. However, if I have negative prejudices, my friend might say, hey, can I come over and we'll have a beer and hang out? Yeah, but only if you don't bring the dog. If you bring the dog, I'm not opening the door, right? So there's a negative discrimination, right? I'm discriminating against the dog. If you want to come over, the dog stays home, right? So that's kind of the difference between them. We have stereotypical ideas about what people, or in this case dogs, are like. We have either positive feelings about those stereotypes or negative feelings about those stereotypes, and then we act accordingly, right? We discriminate in favor of the dog. Yes, please bring the dog over. Or we discriminate negatively against the dog. No, do not bring it over. Does that make sense? Okay. I actually like this picture for this example too, because it's not quite clear what this dog is, right? Like, he's kind of cute, but he could be a little intimidating as well, right? He's kind of like, I feel like he's right on the line between, some dogs are not intimidating at all, right? They're little fluff balls, and you couldn't be scared of them if you tried, right? But this guy's nicely in the middle. He's pretty cute. He looks like he'd be fun to play fetch with, but if he was in a bad mood, look out, right? Okay, let me see here. Yes, so prejudice comes into play when we assign values to our stereotypes, and then discrimination when we act on them. I would say that most people don't think that they hold prejudicial ideas toward people, but I would suggest that you do. You just don't think about them very often, or you haven't kind of examined what you think. But all of us have kind of absorbed prejudicial ideas simply by being in the society that we live in, okay? And sometimes we act on them intentionally, sometimes we act on them unintentionally, right? But they are all there. Let me go back to Yes. Let me go back to here. Did that help a little bit? The dog thing with stereotype and prejudice and discrimination? Did that sort them out a little bit? Yeah? Okay. Maybe the last thing I'll ask you about today is this, the experiment with Jane Elliott's class. Gosh, this is so interesting. You can't do stuff like this anymore because you cannot psychologically experiment on kids. That's not ethical. But back in the 60s, you know, anything goes. But so what happened here? What is this experiment all about? What did they do?
They told the kids that kids with brown eyes are smarter than kids with blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
The blue-eyed kid didn't do as well as the brown-eyed kids.
Right. So the teacher, Jane Elliott, started to circulate a prejudicial idea in the class, right? She said that, oh, brown-eyed kids are smarter than blue-eyed kids, and brown-eyed kids are so much better behaved and so much nicer than blue-eyed kids, right? And so she started to circulate these ideas. She started to say it. And then did the kids start to believe it? They did. They started to believe it. And then, like Mulder mentioned, then what happened, which was so interesting, is that the test scores of brown-eyed kids actually increased. So they actually did better on tests and they were better behaved. The blue-eyed kids actually started to do worse on tests and they started to be more poorly behaved. Is there any connection between eye color and intelligence? No, right? There's no basis for that. It is not true. But it starts to happen, right? It starts to, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? People start to believe the prejudice and they start to respond accordingly. Weird, right? What do you think this tells us about prejudice, this experiment? What might we learn from an experiment like this? Don't experiment on kids is one of them, but what else should we learn?
When a group of people believes something, that something tends to become true, even though it's not in the first place.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about that with the social construction of knowledge, right? Things that people believe to be true has power, even if it's not, right? And so here we see very clear evidence that blue-eyed kids start to do better, brown-eyed kids start to do better, blue-eyed kids start to do worse, and there's no real reason for that, right? There's no intellectual reason. These kids are, you know, there's no correlation between their eye color and their intelligence, but it starts to happen anyway. What's really interesting is that, you know, for the brown-eyed kids, you could see it working for them, right? Because this prejudicial idea is actually in their favor, right? People are actually looking at them and saying, oh, you've got brown eyes, you must be such a smart, good child, right? It's a positive stereotype, right? It's like, oh, yeah, yes, I am, right? You could see that working for them. But the interesting thing is that even though this prejudicial idea is a negative for the blue-eyed kids, they start to believe it anyway, right? So the brown-eyed kids might want to think of themselves as smarter, and you could see that, but the blue-eyed kids, even though it's not really in their best interest to believe this, they do believe it anyway. And it starts to affect their performance. And, this is the last thing I'll say, is that if you didn't know about this experiment, but you came in and looked at the teacher, Jane Elliott, if you looked at her grade book, what would you see? You would see that brown-eyed kids are smarter than blue-eyed kids, right? You would see the data to back that up, right? You would see the evidence to back that up. But is it true? No, right? It's an artifact, if you will. It's an effect of that social prejudice and the fact that these kids have kind of bought into it and they've absorbed that idea and now they're acting it out, right? They're acting out this social prejudice. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. which is really interesting, right? Because nothing else was done, right? Jane is grading the tests as fairly as she can. All you had to do was circulate this idea that one group was better than another, and it had an effect, right? Suddenly one group started doing better than the other. Weird. Okay, that's about all the time we have for today. Shoot, I said I was going to go over the quiz, and I knew I was going to do this. I meant to leave some time at the end, but I knew I was going to get carried away and not do it. So I'm going to review it tomorrow. First thing, no excuses. I'm going to do it because once we get into the class, I get carried away. So I promise I will do it first thing tomorrow. Damn it. I promise I will do it first thing tomorrow. But until then, you can pack it up, and I will see all of you first thing tomorrow or in 20 minutes or so. Okay? So that is it. Goodbye.